Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland out today. Want to welcome back to the program Ari Berman. He, of course, is the national voting rights correspondent for Mother Jones and author of, I believe, what was his second book, Minority Rule, the right-wing attack on the will of the people in the fight to resist it. Ari, always a pleasure to talk to you. I will say, when you first came on and we were in the green room, it occurred to me that maybe you don't need to wear the exact same shirt I'm wearing, but I appreciate the gesture.
Listen, Sam, I always try to coordinate all my outfits with you. You're obviously my fashion icon, and in addition to many other things. So
I understand. People have mentioned it to me, like even when you're not on the show, that you're coordinating what I'm wearing, and people run into you and they go, oh, "That's weird. Ari was wearing the exact same thing today."
Just be happy to know that I can never grow a beard, so you don't have to worry about that part.
I appreciate that. Thank you, and I hope you don't need glasses. Ari, let's talk about
still
this.
Have great eyesight. Yep.
You and I have been talking about the Supreme Court, particularly in the context of its assault on the Voting Rights Act. I mean, now for 11 years, I guess. And, assuming there wasn't a little bit of time where we were anticipating that was happening. And the Supreme Court has only become more right-wing. I don't know what else to say about it. And I think in many respects, more untethered from even what I am even suspicious of to some extent, but the idea of precedent and the idea of like sound legal reasoning. There's a lot of like reverse engineering and backfilling and rather unsubtle reverse engineering and backfilling. Enough so that it convinced one of the oldest institutionalists that we have in our government for at least several more months that there needs to be some reform done. Give me your assessment of the reforms, putting aside for a moment whether they can even happen, but just on the merit of these reforms.
Well, I think a lot of people who've been following the Supreme Court felt like these reforms that Biden called for were long overdue, that he should have pushed them sooner and more aggressively because the extreme nature of the court has been clear for a long time, certainly since he became president. It's only gotten worse since he became president. If you look at what he called for basically three things. He called for an 18-year term for the justices, so term limits for justices. He called for a binding ethics code, and then he called for a constitutional amendment to overturn the recent immunity decision. If you just look at the term limit thing alone, 18 years, which some people said was too weak, but nonetheless, if you just looked at that one policy, if it had been in effect over the past 2 decades, there would now be a 6-3 liberal majority on the court, as opposed to a 6-3 conservative supermajority on the court.
All right, so we should also say that it would be structured in such a way that you would appoint a new justice every 2 years. So there would be some, catch-up time, essentially, to impose. I guess it would be about 18 years until you could really sort of cycle that through. But so what you're saying, just based upon
numbers,
because you'd have more Democratic presidencies over that period of time.
Well, you have 8 years of Obama, and in 8 years Obama got 2 justices. In 4 years, Trump got 3, right? And that only happened because of the hardball tactics that Mitch McConnell used to block Obama from getting a 3rd justice. That would not be the case now. You basically say every 2 years you get a justice, meaning that every president would get 2 in their terms, and Obama would have gotten 4 under that case. Trump would have gotten 2, as opposed to the situation where Trump gets 3, Obama gets 2. And so it would create this situation where the justices wouldn't basically be like, if someone happens to die and you get the power to appoint them 8 days before the election, which is what Donald Trump did with Amy Coney Barrett, right? When Mitch McConnell blocked Merrick Garland from becoming a justice 8 months before the election. So it would make it more fair. Now, there's other things that Biden could have done.
Well, wait a second. I
because
just also want to just go in because, some people criticize this being too political or something like that, which is absurd because let's be clear here. If the idea is that the president nominates justices, there was obviously a notion that it should have at least a second order, politics should be a second order influence on this, right? If the Senate confirms these things, there's a second order political influence on these things. The justice sits alone, is not accountable once they're appointed, but the president's going to be is going to pick a pick that politically they want to, and the Senate's going to be political in the way that they assess this. It makes only sense that you would actually follow who's in office at any given point as a way of doing this, as opposed to the luck of somebody's the quality of someone's arteries, essentially.
Yeah,
or cancer.
exactly. I mean, yeah, it's totally apolitical in that it basically says if you're elected president, you get 2 justices. That's basically how it works. Those justices are going to rotate. So it creates a situation where it's a lot more fair than the way it works now. And also
more democratic too.
It's more democratic. And also people cycle through, which is what we should want, as opposed to people sitting on the court for 50 years and essentially dying on the court. And so I think that it makes a lot of sense. A lot of other state Supreme Courts have term limits. So I think there's other things you could do. Listen, there are other reforms people wanted him to make. There's some thought that term limits would require a constitutional amendment, but expanding the court.
But it will, though, won't it? I mean,
it likely will. It likely will. There's some debate over it, and there's some ways to get around it, but it likely will. But that expanding the court, which is a reform that he did not embrace, that would not require a constitutional amendment, that Congress would have the power to do that because there's no set reason it has to be 9 justices. The problem with expanding the court is A, that is a lot more political, and B, what's to stop another president from just expanding it further, right? Or contracting it. So, I mean, I think in that sense, the term limit thing was thought of as something that would achieve ultimately a more progressive outcome if Democrats keep winning presidential elections, but also would be less political than Supreme Court expansion, for example.
And I mean, the bottom line is be more democratic. And so it would be more, broadly reflective of the will of the people. I mean, not directly, because you don't want it to be too direct, but it broadly would reflect that will.
My bigger issue with the Supreme Court is just that it's the product of 2 undemocratic institutions in terms of how we elect presidents and how we elect senators. And so ultimately, if you have a Supreme Court that's based on a president who's elected through the Electoral College but can still lose the popular vote, and you have a Senate where small states get dramatically more power than larger states, the Supreme Court's going to be skewed as a result of that, right?
How many justices?
I think Supreme Court reform can only go so far if you don't reform the institutions that lead to the Supreme Court in the first place.
How many justices are on the court now? 3 during Trump's term. He did not win the popular vote. Bush did not win the popular vote in from 2000 to 2004. And I'm trying to think who he put on the court. Did he put anybody on the court in those first 4 years?
No. So, I mean, there's 2 ways to look at it. You can either say that 3 justices were directly appointed by a president who lost the popular vote, or you could say that 5 conservative justices were indirectly appointed by a president who lost the popular vote, because of course George W. Bush likely would not have had a second term if he was denied a first term if there was a popular election. So I mean, I think you could say 5 of 6 conservative justices were appointed by Republican presidents who initially lost the popular vote, which is the terminology I use that is accurate.
Okay, so the second reform would be
a binding code of ethics, basically, which to me is just like a no-brainer. I mean,
why would you do that?
The fact that that's controversial is so crazy, and that would be able to prevent theoretically a lot of things, which would be first taking trips and gifts from huge GOP donors that are trying to rig the court in the first place, which Clarence Thomas, Alito did, and then also not recusing yourself from cases in which your wife was a literal insurrectionist in the case of Clarence Thomas, or flew an insurrection flag in the case of Sam Alito. So I think there's just been, I think the problem with the Supreme Court to me, Sam, is that not only has it gotten more undemocratic in terms of its opinions, but it's also just acted more and more like the justices themselves are above the law, right? And accountable to nobody. And they're doing that at the same time that they are becoming much more outwardly sympathetic to just a straight up authoritarian agenda by Donald Trump. And so, I mean, I think people are thinking about how can we try to hold the court accountable if they are appointed for life. Now, I think there's things that Democrats could be doing right now that they're not doing. They control the Supreme Court's funding, right? So they could use the power of the purse to try to hold them more accountable. They could be holding hearings right now. If the justices don't appear, you can still hold the hearing. And so I feel like there is power that Senate Democrats have through the Judiciary Committee that they are not using right now to try to hold the court accountable and draw attention to what the court is doing.
The withholding funding, that to me seems like it wouldn't work because as far as I can tell from what I've read about the relationship between Harlan Crow and Clarence Thomas in particular, is that Thomas was sort of broke. I mean, not broke, but for Washington, he wanted more money. And he was going around telling everybody, I need more money, so I'm going to have to quit the court unless I can find more money. And then Leonard Leo was like, oh, I want to introduce you to somebody, your new best friend. His name is Harlan Crow, and he's a billionaire. He's super generous. And so Harlan Crow buys his mom a house, Thomas's a house, and puts this kid through a private school and then takes him on every trip. And basically is like, it's as if I'm paying you money, but I'm really not. You don't have to pay taxes on this because I'm just like taking you on all these trips. And Thomas was like, okay, now I get to live the life of a rich guy and be Supreme Court justices, and everybody's happy. It seems to me that if Congress cut off money, Alito, all five of the or six of the Republican appointed justices would be like, all of a sudden I'm living high on the hog, and it wouldn't have the effect that you'd want it to. But if these things are not going to happen, which we know they're not going to happen, at least at this stage, and Biden puts them out there to draw attention to the Supreme Court, to say that it's important for political reasons, why in the world would Dick Durbin not be holding hearings right this moment?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. First off, I mean, just to your point about the funding, I mean, if there was a code of ethics, obviously those kind of things with Harlan Crow would be prohibited. But also, if you pulled their funding, they would have no clerks anymore. They would have to write their own opinions, and we know that they don't write their own opinions.
The Harlan Crow would just say, "I'm going to send you over some opinion."
Sure. But I'm saying it would get the justices' attention, and it would make them. I mean, it would make them very angry. And who knows if it would have its intended effect? But I'm saying it's a power that they have right now that they're not using. And that's basically what people are saying, that what Biden is doing, this is a message thing. I happen to think it's an important message thing because Biden is the ultimate institutionalist. So for him to embrace Supreme Court reform starts to push Supreme Court reform more into the middle of the party in terms of where things are at. But he can't do it alone. And first off, I think the Senate should be confirming more judges. I don't know why they're not doing this because there's a very real chance they're going to lose the Senate in 2024. So I don't know why they're not pushing harder to confirm judges in the first place. Biden is still behind Trump.
Told me I'm supposed to be doing messaging bills.
Yeah.
The Bailey said I can't do it.
But the messaging in a presidential election is huge because we consistently see that Republicans are voting on the Supreme Court. That was a big reason why Trump won in 2016. Yep. Democrats are starting to vote more in the court, largely because of the Dobbs decision, but it's still not front and center. Even the immunity decision was overlooked because of Biden's debate performance, right? It was like a one-day story, the Supreme Court giving the president the power of a king, as opposed to like something that is set the terms of the debate. So I think the more the Democrats can talk about the Supreme Court and actually show their voters that they're doing something about it, I think it's both the right thing to do morally, but I think it could only help them politically as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I don't even know that there's anything they can actually do at this moment, but attempting to do something shows their voters how important the Supreme Court is. And then this has a sort of a virtuous circle, if you will. Lastly, let me just say about the third thing about the, presidents don't have immunity act, it seems to only cover stuff for former presidents. Like, I don't like, it's unclear to me. I noticed Biden didn't sort of say like, well, the immunity doesn't exist while you're president, on some level. Now that I know that's been an open question, right? Like, if Donald Trump shot somebody or ordered somebody to be shot, could, and I guess maybe you can't get criminally prosecuted until you leave the office.
Well, I think that's the debate exactly. That there's no mechanism to prosecute you while you're in office. I'm not
There's
an expert
impeachment to kick you out of office,
exactly,
I guess.
Exactly, but impeachment has basically become something that the Senate will never do because it's so hard to imagine them agreeing on the numbers needed for 2/3 of the Senate to agree on impeaching a president. If they didn't do it for January 6th, what are they going to do it for?
I don't want to find out. I don't want to find out, to be honest with you. But Ari Berman, always a pleasure. Thanks so much. You and I agree this has got to be a bigger issue, the Supreme Court. We'll see if it is. I think at least, the very least, the amount of time that I think is going to be dedicated to Dobbs over the next 3 or 4 months is going to at least put the court in at least some perspective for Democrats and liberals and progressives and even leftists. I think you and I know that there's a lot of other cases too that have a dramatic effect on our lives on a daily basis that we never really hear about because it just doesn't have the same sort of, implications of taking away an individual right for 50 years, that it existed for 50 years, but nevertheless, super important. Ari Berman, always a pleasure.
Always great to see you and match outfits with you as well. So
yes, I will text you and let you know what I'm doing tomorrow in terms of clothes.
Let me know the look and I'll try to match it.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.